Hello, I just wanted to update you guys on where we're at with the reporting, which we finished. So when you log into your queue manager screen, go under reports, I think we reviewed before, and that will show any activity as it's going on for that day. It'll only be for that day. It's just a snapshot. Then we have, okay, here we have cases heard. And so you could pick by um, reported by user. And then here, you choose your date. So let's say the 5th. And then click here, the 11th. So we want to see these 2 days. And then click apply. You'll see verify your dates here. Click apply. And then what you'll do is you'll get your activity for that period. So clerk 3. And as I mentioned before, take a look at these. In case something is off, I wouldn't really know because I don't really know your volumes. But if there is something fishy, just let me know and we can correct it. So that's your cases heard or served report. Now, remember, folks have been served here. Looks like 9. So the clerk, the check-in person must have took care of it. The clerk saw a few, and then the cashier is going to have the most in this case because, so this is your, we have the call. So Marge is called. Refer to that as served. We're serving. Then, now if Marge completes whatever she has to complete here, the transaction, heard will be clicked, and that will be recorded in the report, the served report under Public Defender. However, which it looks like here, if Marge is transferred to the cashier or to city attorneys, let's say, she's not going to show up in this report under Public Defender as being served because what's happening is she's going to another department, and say the city attorney calls her. So as soon as this button's checked, that's accounting for the defendants being served specifically by this particular queue. So this is, in other words, the end of their ride. So that's where served comes from. So they could be in a queue, but if they're transferred to another queue, they're not going to be counted as served. They're not going to be counted as served until that serve button is pressed. Here, what we're doing is use the same date range. So Caseflow is actually tracking the transfer rate. So how many folks were transferred from a queue, and this kind of balances your served report because if your served report looks low or odd, you can look here and see, well, we had 85 folks this day transferred, 57 transferred from clerk, and then distributed this way. So the Caseflow report shows how you're moving, effectively moving defendants across your departments. Okay, so in queue is giving you a picture of how many defendants in a time period are actually in a queue. So here we have 99, 69. Now, this doesn't mean that they were served. All it means is that the defendant was in a queue. Now they could have been in this queue, and then to this queue, and then to this queue. So essentially what this does is help identify the volume across the departments or queues, which would be helpful for example, resource management, additional staff, looking at processes here. When you look at wait time, if you're finding out that based on this volume, people are waiting a long time, So in-queue report really helps you deal with volume issues. Your transfer report or your case flow report helps you see how the workflow is happening and how that might affect this. Okay. Then your abandonment rate. So this is the one I have questions on. So this looks like a lot of folks have abandoned the queues. And typically I don't even see this volume in colleges. And I don't know why defendants would abandon, especially in a court situation. So what I wanted to bring to your attention is that how this would happen. Actually, let me go over here. So how abandon um, gets recorded is if in your message you give the option to defendants to reply L, leave the queue, and they do, they're recorded as abandonment. In other words, they left, right? They didn't get served. But the goal is always to serve more, not less. So that's one way. Now, the other way is if your department personnel clicks this button. If they remove somebody from the queue with this button, they're going to be recorded as abandoned. So what I'm concerned with is it looks like um, staff is actually using this button instead of this button. Um, so if you could look into that, it just, like I said, seems really high. And so if somebody has completed a transaction and they're not being transferred anywhere else, they should be clicking heard. The only time you're going to really click the red button is if staff is waiting for somebody, a defendant to come, and the defendant hasn't arrived, and maybe your policy is if they don't arrive after 2 text messages in 5 minutes, you could always bump them back. But after a while, you can establish a threshold where, okay, they're going to be removed from the queue, and then they have to start all over. So by clicking this button, puts them in the abandonment category. So what I'm trying to figure out is why we have so many abandoned folks. So I'm just concerned that either there's something wrong with the reporting, or staff is using this button uh, too much, or maybe that abandonment rate is correct. I'm not sure. Okay, then this is average wait time. So we do that by day. So here, it's showing there, you can click on this and it's less than 13 seconds for this cashier. 7 minutes for this cashier. Check-in is less than 15 minutes. And then when we get to the clerk, it's roughly 5 minutes. This is 85 minutes, 48 minutes, and then 94 minutes. Now the last one is the important one. And this is your transaction time report. So this report has the most detail. So you'll choose a date period. Could be the whole week, or it could be 1 to 2 days. Click apply, then click show. And here it's going to show you um, each transaction that the individual or the defendant experienced through their journey in the court. So Andrea on 210 started in the check-in queue. We include the citation and case number, and the wait time was 31 minutes. Andrea was then, looks like, transferred um, to the city attorney's office and ended up spending 33 minutes there. And let's see, Blake, same thing, check-in, 29 minutes, 9 minutes in the clerk, and then 7 minutes in the cashier. So how that's calculated. For example, Lillian is put in the check-in queue. She's waiting. Let's see how long she's been waiting. Refresh. Okay, she's been waiting a few seconds, it looks like. And When she's called to come to the clerk or come to any department, the clock starts to tick. It starts to record the transaction time. The time it takes from being called to the time the individual is heard, just like the heard report, or deleted, or, and this is where we capture um, the data related to moving to another queue. So in most cases, we can see that they get moved. So the transaction time stops for the check-in queue as soon as another queue is selected. And what we'll see here is Lily Allen is in this other queue. Now, the transaction time doesn't start until it's her turn, until she's called. So the average wait time is calculating right now. Um, Now for Brandon, the call button was pressed and the time is being calculated as to how long the transaction is. And it will stop either when the heard button is pressed, deleted, or again, move to another queue. So I think the only thing to note is that when you're moved to another queue, the transaction time doesn't start. The average wait time starts. The transaction time is kicked in, triggered by the call button. And and then it stops either by heard, delete, or being moved. So that's a detail of the transaction, and that should hopefully work well for the city attorney's office. And you can export these. That should say transaction or on an old system. So you might get this error because it's the old .xls, um, but it's Excel. So here you'll have your names, hearing date, queue they're in, citation, case number, and transaction time. And now you're able to actually um, sort and group, uh, by department, by queue, and do some analytical stuff if you want. Um, Folks at check-in aren't going to have a case number, but they're in here as well. So for example, I sorted the data by city attorney and picked, I had 2 dates, and then I created a bar chart. So I'm looking at it by docket number or case number, and then this is the transaction time by case number for just city attorney, folks that run that queue. So 21 minutes, 26 minutes, 16 minutes, and so this is our data that they can use to trend. The only thing that I have to fix is we set this up where it's easy to see hours and minutes. However, it doesn't convert into something you could chart. Unfortunately, I had to do this by hand. So I'll add another column where it's actually numeric, so you don't have to do it by hand. But I think this is what they were looking for, and you can do it by pretty much any department, any way you want to slice it. And any feedback, look forward to hearing about it. Thank you.